There's something unsettling about a woman who has learned to be genuinely happy alone, something that makes society uncomfortable in ways most people can't even articulate. And by the end of this exploration, you'll understand why her very existence challenges everything we've been taught about love, worth, and what it means to be complete. The silence that envelops a woman living in solitude isn't emptiness, it's sanctuary. Those who fail to grasp the profound value of this sacred space often label her as cold, distant, perhaps even arrogant. What remains invisible to most is that she didn't construct these boundaries to exclude the world. She built them to preserve herself. Carl Jung observed that everything we refuse to confront within ourselves inevitably gets projected onto others, which perhaps explains why so many women still mistake solitude for absence when it could actually be the most fertile ground for authentic self-discovery. While countless individuals seek fulfillment through external connections, this woman turned her attention inward. There, within the vast landscape of her own unconscious mind, she faced the ghosts she had avoided for years: childhood wounds, unspoken abandonments, attachments masquerading as love. Her choice to embrace solitude didn't emerge from an open wound, but from a scar that had finally healed. She didn't abandon her belief in love. She simply stopped accepting what others called love when it only diminished her spirit. This woman has known chaos intimately. She's loved until she lost herself completely, given far too much, begged for scraps that should never have been offered in the first place. At some pivotal moment, she awakened, and this awakening wasn't sudden, but rather a series of disappointments that gradually stopped causing pain and began offering wisdom instead. What you witness now isn't coldness, but emotional maturity, and maturity can be frightening because it demands genuine presence, depth, and unwavering truth. If this resonates with something deep inside you, if you recognize this woman, or perhaps see yourself in her journey, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel right now, because we're building a community of awakened souls who understand that growth happens in the spaces between what we were told to want and what we actually need. Hit that subscribe button and join thousands of others who are ready to explore the profound truth that real transformation begins the moment we stop seeking validation and start seeking authenticity. She no longer desires just any company. She craves reciprocity. She's not drawn to promises anymore, but to genuine presence. Perhaps this explains why she appears unreachable to many, because she doesn't want to be rescued. She wants to be truly seen. That requires more than charm or eloquent words. It demands the courage to dive into depths where few dare to venture. This is where many retreat, not because she's difficult, but because she's whole. When a woman achieves wholeness, she awakens two extremes in the world around her. Admiration flows from those who are also seeking that completeness. Fear emanates from those still living in fragments, waiting for another person to make them feel complete. She doesn't wish to complete anyone. She wants to overflow alongside someone who has also discovered themselves. Until that moment arrives, she remains alone, not by fate's cruel design, but out of fierce loyalty to her own soul. This woman isn't hiding. She's protecting herself. There exists a vast difference between isolation and self-preservation, though the world struggles to accept such distinction. Society still preaches that happiness only exists in pairs, distrusting those without partners, as if solitude were a mark of failure. Jung once noted that where convention rules, there's little space for authenticity, and this woman refuses to live by convention. She lives by essence. She hears familiar refrains like, "You're too selective," "You should be more open," "Nobody's perfect." Her response is a calm, steady, almost knowing smile, because she understands that what many call selective is simply maintaining basic standards, standards it took her decades to realize she deserved. She's not pursuing perfection. She's seeking someone mature enough to love without destroying, someone who has completed the inner work she has already undertaken. Honestly, that's not something you encounter on every street corner. The discomfort she generates isn't found in her words, but in what she represents. She's living evidence that happiness without dependence on others is not only possible but transformative. This reality strips away masks from men who thrive on female insecurity. They feel threatened. Women still trapped in approval-seeking patterns feel judged. Yet she isn't here to confront anyone. She's simply existing authentically, and that authenticity serves as a brutal mirror for those still living in emotional chains. This woman operates without urgency. She doesn't need to accelerate connections to please anyone. She honors her own pace, and for this, she ignites silent fury in a society demanding instant gratification. She seeks depth while the world chases distractions. She values presence while others offer only shallow availability. She yearns for soul-level connections while everyone else attempts to appear interesting on social media platforms. When she says no, it's not manipulation, but truth. When she walks away, it's not drama, but self-defense. When she chooses solitude over empty companionship, it's not arrogance, but clarity. This clarity, earned through pain and surrender, represents her greatest revolution, because she doesn't live to please others, she lives to be authentic, and that simple act of being makes her dangerous to conventional systems. Perhaps what disturbs people most about this woman isn't her solitude, but the peace she's discovered within herself. Jung taught that those who look outward dream, while those who look inward awaken, and it was precisely this inward journey she undertook. The process wasn't easy. It required stripping away masks, confronting ghosts of emotional dependency, and rebuilding herself piece by careful piece. She no longer defines herself through others' perceptions. She sees herself through her own eyes, and this shift changes everything. How often have you wondered whether being alone represents failure or freedom? How frequently have you felt compelled to justify not having someone by your side? This woman experienced those doubts too, once believing something was fundamentally wrong with her for being alone in a world that idolizes couples, even unhappy ones. One transformative day, she understood that being alone was infinitely better than being invisible within a relationship. That day she made an unbreakable pact with herself. Never again would she accept less than what she truly deserved. Her path isn't linear. There are days of doubt, moments of nostalgia, nights of profound silence. Yet there's also a strength that grows with each conscious decision she makes. She learned that genuine love doesn't cage, doesn't consume, doesn't manipulate. The love she desires is the kind that liberates, that adds value, that supports without suffocating. Until that love materializes, she chooses continued growth in solitude, not from pride, but from integrity. This woman embodies Jung's concept of individuation. She shattered expectations, faced her shadow, descended into the unconscious, and returned more complete than ever. Now that she recognizes her true self, she refuses to be half of anything again. She doesn't want someone to complete her, she wants someone to share awareness with. This is intimidating because it requires emotional responsibility, and sadly, few people are prepared to love responsibly. Most still love from lack, from possession, from fear. If she walks alone today, it's because every step echoes with learning. Every refusal is an act of self-respect. Every boundary she maintains reminds us that love should never be begged for. She no longer needs to prove anything to anyone, and this certainty, born from her soul's deepest parts, transforms everything around her. A woman who has rediscovered herself becomes dangerous not because of weapons, but because of clarity. The woman living alone without romantic partnership isn't the same woman who once pleaded to be loved. Something inside her broke, and it was precisely that break that liberated her. Sometimes only in collapse does the soul discover its new form. Jung used to say that trees growing toward heaven must also have roots reaching toward hell, and that's exactly what she experienced. She descended into the hell of her own story, faced ancestral fears, inherited pain, traumas belonging not just to her, but to all women who came before. She broke cycles, rejected relationships repeating toxic patterns, learned it wasn't her responsibility to heal anyone, save anyone, or accept scraps from fear of loneliness. When she stopped accepting less, the world tried convincing her she was wrong, but she held firm, first with uncertainty, then awareness, finally with invulnerability. Someone who has lived in their own abyss no longer fears absence. She learned to nourish herself with silence, to find warmth in her own presence. She's not unreachable. She simply no longer allows invasion. There's a profound difference between opening your heart and letting yourself be torn apart. She opens herself, yes, but only for those approaching with truth, not rehearsed speeches or empty promises. She's witnessed enough to distinguish between presence and performance. Her intuition has sharpened. Her energy serves as a filter. She can sense from great distances what lacks depth and doesn't hesitate to withdraw. Her transformation isn't superficial, but archetypal, as if she's accessed ancient wisdom, an old memory that women weren't born to serve but to express, not to be molded, but to overflow. In accessing this memory, something awakened within her. A wild woman, intuitive, emotionally sovereign, a woman who, though alone, is far from lost. She's in communion with something greater, with her own destiny. No matter how others attempt to diminish her, with labels like cold, difficult, distant, nothing adheres, because she no longer lives to fit in. She lives to expand. She no longer fights for attention. She radiates presence. She's no longer waiting to be chosen. She does the choosing. And this reversal confuses those still trying to control the feminine. But she's no longer there. She's crossed the threshold and discovered that real relationship begins only after loving yourself enough to not need anyone. There's something sacred about how she moves through the world. She doesn't require applause or public validation. Her confidence is quiet, and within that silence lives her true strength. Jung said that everything we face within eventually becomes our destiny, and perhaps that's why this woman, in choosing herself repeatedly, has become the author of a destiny few can understand, but many secretly envy. She no longer attempts to fill voids with promises or convince anyone she deserves love. She doesn't beg for space in anyone's life, because she's learned that presence should never be begged for. It should be invited. When invitations don't come from truth, she simply declines without anger or bitterness, stepping away with dignity earned from getting lost too many times to allow the same wound again. What few understand is that this woman still yearns for love, still wants to be held, touched, chosen, but she wants it without losing herself, because she spent too long trying to squeeze into molds too small for the soul she carries. Now she only offers herself where there's room to be whole, and that requires maturity, extending far beyond romance. It requires awareness, having faced one's shadow while still choosing love. She's not seeking fairy tales, but soul alliance, connection where there's no domination or submission, where both can grow beside each other without dimming their colors, silencing their pain, or shrinking their dreams. If that seems excessive to some, so be it, because she'd rather wait than survive on emotional fragments. To many this sounds like arrogance, but it's really self-love in its purest form. We're witnessing a new archetype of woman, one who walked away from superficiality and dove into depths, who tired of being merely desired and chose to be respected, who chose solitude, not because she gave up on love, but because she began understanding that real love never demands self-denial. When a woman grasps this truth, her entire world begins changing. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence speaks before words. Wherever she goes, energy shifts. Something in the room realigns subtly but unmistakably. This isn't mysticism, but energy, the weight of someone who faced the most brutal inner wars and chose to return in peace, not because she conquered all fears, but because she learned to live with them without being defeated. This woman doesn't reject love. She simply learned not to submit to unbalanced relationships where one must dim so another can shine. She longs to love, but in love, where her essence doesn't need editing. Love where she can be both shadow and light, laughter and tears, silence and storm, because she realized those who only love the beautiful parts haven't learned what love truly is. Those demanding constant sweetness still don't understand bitterness is beauty, so necessary for growth. She's too whole to settle for halves, too free to accept prisons disguised as care, too sensitive to endure shallow bonds, yet simultaneously strong enough to keep choosing this path even when it hurts, even when it's lonely, even when it's misunderstood. Deep down, the world fears women like her, women who don't need, don't bow, refuse to be molded because they challenge invisible structures, question old patterns, break silent emotional contracts that once declared a woman only has worth if she's with someone. When she breaks those contracts, rewrites her own narrative, she inspires others, and for the system, that's dangerously revolutionary. So she continues, sometimes with tears, sometimes with chest held high, but always with feet firmly planted because now she knows she's not alone. She's with herself, and after everything she's experienced, that is more than enough. The love that comes after won't be salvation but celebration. It won't come to fill her, but to overflow. When a woman chooses to walk alone, the world rushes to convince her she's making a mistake. But deep inside, she feels something aligning, not pride or rebellion, but rare wisdom that can only be born in silence, the same wisdom Jung called individuation, the process of becoming fully yourself without masks, without compromise. That truth doesn't need to shout. It shows itself in how she quietly closes doors without resentment, how she withdraws when environments no longer nourish her, how she smiles peacefully even with no one beside her, because she discovered that being alone isn't punishment, but a vow of loyalty to her own soul. The soul of an awakened woman does not submit, does not dim, does not beg. It simply is, and that is enough. The world will keep trying to tell her she's missing something, keep offering distractions, artificial princes, love made for display. But she's seen behind the curtain, understood it's not about finding someone, but about never losing yourself again. When this realization blooms, everything changes. Desire becomes discernment, lack becomes choice, waiting becomes a path. What once hurt now teaches, what once bound now sets free. That woman who lives alone is more than someone who doesn't fit molds. She is a living symbol of emotional freedom, a reminder that rebuilding is possible without hurry, without fear, without needing to prove anything to anyone. If something inside you was touched by this exploration, maybe it's because deep down you're ready for a new kind of love, love that begins with reconciliation with yourself, love that feeds on silence, presence, and truth, love that can't be negotiated, begged for, or disguised. And if that love hasn't arrived yet, maybe it's because you first needed to become the woman who no longer accepts less than she deserves.